welcome to First Tuesday Talk. It's a regular first Tuesday of the month event from School of Humankind. School of Humankind is an organization we set up a few months ago. We offer a huge number of free community events twice a week, talks, workshops, panel discussions, conversations, meditations, sometimes practical art sessions. We are so diverse in what we offer. We're a group of educators and coaches and trainers and teachers and activists and passionate visionaries dotted all around the world. And one of the things we do is encourage intelligent conversation. By intelligent conversation, what I really mean is the ability to express a viewpoint and hear somebody else's viewpoint, and for an interaction to happen which doesn't involve getting upset with each other. It means being able to disagree, being able to argue a point, being able to see other people's perspectives. And so, what we do on First Talk Tuesday is precisely that. We have quite a formal little structure. There should be 5 of us, but one wasn't able to make it. And then at the last minute, due to a hurricane that's hit the US, another one wasn't able to make it. In fact, Gaby Cadena, who set up this particular talk, wasn't able to make it because she's in an emergency meeting. So we have me, I'm John Britton, we have Angela Jameson, we have Wyndon James. And we're going to talk about humanizing the workplace. I think if I remember rightly, there was a subtitle which is Inhuman Organizations Remix or something like that. I can't quite remember, but it was something like that. We've got a little structure, which is that each of us gets to talk for 2.5 minutes, introduce a perspective, and then each of us gets to talk for another 2.5 minutes to respond to what we've heard. And then we will chuck the idea around between us for a few minutes and see where that goes. We'll end up either with complete agreement or radical disagreement or somewhere in between. So we're going to talk about humanizing the workplace. We haven't discussed what we're going to say. There's no preparation. This is just 3 perspectives on that particular topic. And I think I'm going to go first, because then what I say, nobody else can take it away from me. So I'm going to get to go first. And Angela has a little timer, which she's going to put up in the corner of her screen.
Are you ready, John, to extol your brilliantness?
Oh, steady on. Whenever you are.
All right.
So humanizing the workplace. It's an interesting phrase, isn't it? Because it sort of assumes that the workplace is inhuman and we need to do something to humanize it. It sort of could be seen as assuming that workplaces are inhuman and we must do something to try to make them less inhuman. I don't accept that. I'm sorry, I don't even begin to accept that. If a workplace is dehumanizing the people who work in it, then the question we're facing is not how do we humanize it. The question we're facing is how do we redesign it root and branch so it doesn't dehumanize the people who are working in it. In other words, instead of trying to humanize something and solve a problem, how about we don't create the problem? A workplace is a system. It's a series of interlocking systems, which altogether make up a big system that we call the workplace. If the system is dehumanizing the people who are working in it, the system is wrong. So rather than thinking about humanizing the workplace, I want to think about aligning systems with human reality. Here's some human reality. Humans are diverse. Before we even get to sort of genuine diversity of different faces and different experiences and ages and cultures in the room, before that, even if you've got a homogenous workshop, it's still diverse. Everybody's different. Workshop, workplace. It's still diverse. Everybody is different. We bring different things to the table. Humans are flawed. We make mistakes. Humans are complex. They're one thing one day and another thing another day. Humans are creative. Humans make mistakes and learn from mistakes and discover new ways of doing things. Humans thrive when they are given some kind of agency over their work. If we can't create systems that align with these human realities, the systems are failing and we need to redesign them from the bottom up. Because your timer disappeared, Angela. I think that you were waving at me to stop.
And I apologize because I checked the links LinkedIn Live and it stopped because it says due to a corruption problem or because the media used features your browser did not support. And then I thought that must be the timer.
Okay, well, according to, I'm looking at the LinkedIn Live right now and we still seem to be going.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, well then I apologize for that, but I'm going to do the timer on the side because apparently from mine, it's not connected anymore, but
it's good how easy technology makes our lives.
We'll continue because this is continuous learning in action, right?
It is indeed.
Oh my God.
Let's go with Wyndham. Do you want to follow up with that?
I can do, yeah.
And Angela, wave with 10 seconds to go or something. So Wyndham.
Okay, let me just reset this. 2.5. Okay, ready, go.
It's a really interesting one, this topic, because I come to it with a cynicism born of my 20-year previous career. And already I feel an alignment with some of the things that John said. I think we have a fundamental problem with work and people. And I think at its core, it comes down to a divergence or a complete separation of core basic need and objective. Now, I fully appreciate that there are businesses out there that are wonderful, that treat their employees brilliantly well. And yet, if we look at certainly all the businesses I worked for, they had a core priority, which was maximize profit. Now they could tell you lots of stories around their values and all these different things and the impact that they had on their communities they worked in. Fundamentally, they were about profit, and when profit was risked, people were sacrificed in the pursuit of that profit every year, without doubt. When we come to the human element of it, I believe we have 7 deep core needs. And they are, we need to feel heard, we need to feel seen, we need to feel accepted, we need to feel loved, and we need to feel safe. And that safe piece comes into 3. Physically, we need to feel safe. Emotionally and psychologically, we need to feel safe. And I think there's an element of spiritual safety, however you choose to define that. The way our work is structured at the moment, at best, it maybe sees, hears, and provides physical safety through a salary, through remuneration. But most jobs, I don't know whether people have read Bullshit Jobs by David Graeber, but he's a guy who postulates that approximately half of jobs in the world are meaningless. And when we associate work ethic with self-worth and work with self-worth, which we often do, when the job is meaningless, when only one of our core needs is being met, the physical safety, then we have a very distinct problem. That is my 2.5 minutes up. But wonderful. In a nutshell, I'm going to keep going purely to capture that kind of, yes, work can do more. And I'm not suggesting work should address all 7 of those key needs. I don't believe it should. However, if it is only or primarily providing us with monetary return for whatever it wants from us, how many people in the world have more than one job because one job doesn't provide sufficient money to even provide for physical safety? Ignoring the fact that we want to be seen, heard, accepted, loved, all that authenticity piece. So I think we have a root and branch problem.
Beautiful.
Says the
Thank
cynic
you.
in me.
And I think
And
I'm single-handedly showing everyone how you cannot multitask. Because I'm worried about the live stream. I'm looking at the timer and
don't you go worrying about the live stream, because I've got you on silent on a little iPad by my side, and we're perfectly happily dribbling along on LinkedIn live stream. So don't you go worrying about that. You just worry about saying brilliant things for the next 2.5 minutes about humanizing the workplace. Don't forget to time yourself.
And I have a timer. Multitasking doesn't work. I will hold the timer for you.
okay, or maybe
Start
I
whenever
was
you're
going to
ready.
shorten mine because I'm so
But that's
distracted. I'm
just a
not sure
cop
what
out.
to say.
Your 2.5 minutes on humanizing the workplace
Okay.
starts
Starts
now.
now.
Let's go. All right. So humanizing the workplace, from my experience, comes from the whole engineering and technical arena of thought, where I've seen so many times we've got leaders who don't really see the human part of their leadership. And it is a little bit of a challenge within the technical realm, because people who accomplish amazing technical things are usually elevated to positions of leadership, and they don't necessarily have the best human emotional intelligence quotients. And then you layer the whole thing of engineers on top of that, you've just got a whole Dilbert cartoon thing. And that's, there's a reason why Dilbert connects to people, because it's so true. And because a lot of people in that realm have less of an emotional connection, there's the disconnectedness that relaxing, and which is what I always talk about, the relaxed productivity, that people need to have more than just their work life recognized in the workplace to be effective and to be productive. So when forget the human side, we forget that people have families, we forget people have pressures outside of work, and we're demanding total adherence and productivity in the office. We forget that by adding those pressures, we're actually decreasing their effectiveness at work. So by humanizing the workplace, we can actually have more productive, happier individuals. I was looking up a stat when I was doing a speech last month, and the biggest factor to burnout was people's own personal desire for perfection. And so people already have that in them. High achieving of professionals always want to do a great job. So when we are pushing them from a leadership position, they can actually start to burn out, which will impact the workplace. Okay. Thank you, Wyndham.
Yeah.
Brilliant, brilliant. So now what happens next in this conversation is that each of us, and we'll go in the same order, has a chance to either develop our thoughts or respond to what our two colleagues have said. And I'll go first on that. We'll take another 2.5 minutes or so, or in Wyndham's case, 3.5 minutes.
We love you, Wyndham.
So we'll go for about another 2.5 minutes, and let's just pick out a couple of things, and then we'll go for a open conversation afterwards. There's a few things that I'll go first. I want to just pick up on in what was said. First of all, I think I find myself in deep agreement with Wyndham that there is a fundamental problem, not so much with work, but with how we conceive of work, of the idea that work is this thing that is separate from life, that we do outside of our humanness. And I think, work-life balance, all of that, but there's also work-life integration, in the sense that you can be a human while you are working. You don't check your humanness at the door to the office or the factory. There is a sense that you are respected for your complex diversity within the workplace, just as you hope you're respected for that among your community and your family and so on. Yeah, Angela then brings up, I think, a really important point that, and I think it's vital, people get promoted on the basis of their capacity, perhaps as a technician or as an academic. As I worked in universities for a while, they're a good academic, they get promoted up to management. They don't necessarily have the skills to occupy that leadership role. That's where systems are so vital. Somebody should go into a new position knowing that there is a functioning system that will support them as they grow. And so by systems, I mean you have in place a simple understanding that people not only have agency in their own work, but when there are meetings, there will be space for everybody to speak, that there will be respectful communication across the lines that separate different departments and also hierarchically. Because agency, this sense that we have some ability to take ownership of our work, is fundamental to being human. And it brings me to the last point, which is burnout is so often about perfectionism, and perfectionism is so often about a lack of agency. I can't achieve it, I can't get there. Whereas agency is about saying, what do I do next to get further? A workplace humanization process is an empowerment process. That was my response to what the two of you said, which I find myself in strong agreement with. Wyndham,
Yeah,
where does that take you?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So you mentioned a couple of things which I find really interesting. This idea of systems. And I think the results we get are perfectly aligned to the systems we have. Right? There's a famous James Clear quote where he says, "We don't rise to the level of our aspirations, we fall to the levels of our systems." So we have endemic unhappiness at work. It is a massive problem. And that is not accidental. It's not just one of these things we sit there and go, well, we just can't figure it out. We don't understand. It's the systems we have in place, the systems of work, the systems of what makes a business or what is considered successful about a business are so narrow. And like I said, so distanced from what makes a human being successful, that whilst there is supremacy of the work of the business objective above and beyond and in the face of all things to do with human beings, this will continue to happen. It's the I can't remember if it was the 80s where shareholder supremacy became an economic approach, or how you run a business is you absolutely prioritize your shareholders above everybody else. I worked for organizations where in the budgeting phase at the end of one financial year, you would go to the experts within the business and say, what do you predict for next year? They would sit there, brilliant people, and they would say, well, this is what we know we're pretty guaranteed. This is what we think we can move it to, and this would be our stretch. And they'd submit those numbers, and the business would just get, it's not enough. And they would double or triple the number, which makes the whole process of asking the experts what they think they can do completely redundant. And then you get halfway through that next financial year, and it was always at the 6-month mark. The profits for the year were under threat. We'd be behind the curve. So what's the easiest way of reducing, of filling that gap? It's not winning more business. That's really bloody difficult. The easiest way of filling that gap is to reduce your headcount, is to reduce the cost of people in your business. So every year there would be waves of redundancies. And when we are dealing with a system and an organization like that, that holds humans as entirely disposable, then people will be disposable.
Well done, Wyndham.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Okay, my turn.
Go, Angela.
All right. So I love the talk of systems because, of course, as an engineer, we feel like we need to have the systems to guide us. But the whole irony that we need systems to promote us to be human is kind of not lost on me too much. But I feel like we see work that we need the structure and we need the guidance, almost like being in a family unit. I mean, work is very much like a family. A leader should very much be like a parent. But we need the structure in order to learn how we, as a family, as a business, treat each other. So if the leader is not showing humanizing tendencies, we don't feel the freedom to actually be human. And I know, especially as a woman in a male-dominated field, I'm dealing with things that a lot of my colleagues aren't dealing with. The biggest one being I was having children as I was going through my career, and you guys can't have children. One of those biological things. So there's a part there that I needed to either celebrate because my leader allowed me to know and feel that I'm a mother and I didn't sleep very well the night before for many reasons, or I had to suppress it because no one else had to deal with that. Now, I'm not saying men don't, because it made me really aware at that time when I was having children and not sleeping well, that there were probably, 50% of the table that had small children. And I assume they're, more involved fathers these days. So half of us were really tired as we were going through our work processes, as we were planning really huge projects, as we were making safety decisions. So I think, if only for safety and leadership, that we do need to recognize this whole humanizing and realizing that we are people too. We're not just machines, and productivity and safety and everything your company values is based on being human.
Perfect.
Brilliant. Let's throw this open. If it's all right, I want to just respond straight away to something you said there, Angela, because I think it's really important. You said that or suggested there's a sort of irony in wanting or needing systems to help us be human. I'm not sure I agree, actually, in a sense, in that I think that families are systems and communities are systems and friendships are systems. They're all systems, and it's useful, I think, to kind of recognize that we can talk about three different sorts of systems. There's simple systems where if you do A, you get B. There's chaotic systems where if you do one thing, there's massively disproportionate outcomes, but you can actually trace those outcomes. You can go, that caused that, and that caused that, and that caused that, and it ends up, the famous one, you can trace how the butterfly flapping its wings in Brazil ends up at a storm in America. You can trace the steps in a chaotic system. Then there are complex systems where you cannot actually map outcomes directly onto inputs. Things emerge in complex systems. I was reading a book about complexity theory a little while ago, and the metaphor that the scientist who's writing it used was that you can't guarantee an outcome in a complex system, but you can tilt the table so things are more likely to flow in certain directions. Can't guarantee, but I do ink paintings. I wet the paper and then I drop ink on, and then I don't quite know what it's going to end up like, but I guide the ink where I want it to go. It's not random, but it's not controlled. Now, many years ago, when I launched my first book, Encountering Ensemble, at a seminar in Los Angeles, there was had a 3-day conversation about the theatre world in America, and there was a woman there in her 30s who just talked about how when she had her first child, she found most of her work dried up. And then one day, because she had a kid and, people didn't want a little kid in the rehearsal room and all of that, all of those things. We're artists, we're busy. And then one day she was invited to be in a show, and she went to rehearsals, and she had a kid and with her because he was only young. And another performer came up and said, I'll take the kid, I'll walk around, keep him happy or her happy while you rehearse your scene. And afterwards, the mother said, "Oh, thanks for doing that." And the person who'd taken the kid said, "No, thank you for bringing the kid. Thank you for bringing your motherhood here. Thank you for bringing your experience into what we don't otherwise have. Thank you for being willing to come in here when you're probably exhausted and still give your best in this work, because it makes all of us richer when you do that." A few years later, I was running a big project in England, and my choreographer, who was coming over from Greece, phoned up about 6 months before or emailed me and said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm pregnant." And I just wrote back and said, "Magnificent. This year you'll do the project pregnant." She'd be very pregnant, 8 months. And next year you can do the project, and I'll, when you're choreographing, put the boy or girl in the pram and I'll take it for a little walk. That sort of attitude tilts the table towards good outcomes. Doesn't guarantee them, but it tilts the table, because it's about human interaction rather than trying to force humans to fit into systems which were not designed with us in mind. Feels to me we can, even if we can't control, we can affect outcomes by making human choices in all of our interactions based on complexity, diversity, based on flaws, all of these things. So that I had a very strong response to what you were saying, Angela. It's very strong.
Sorry, I just wanted to say, I love the tilt the table to give the better potential for outcome. Because, when you talk about tilting, I think about, the civil engineering and plumbing knowledge that it only takes 1% grade for something to run downhill, right? So
and how brilliant. And if you're in a situation in work where something is not being achieved and you decide to respond by going to the person who is perhaps struggling, "How can I help?" rather than "we have a problem," you're tilting the table, because you're treating them like a person, not like as a servant.
Yeah, love that. Yeah.
1%.
Yeah. It's really, there's a couple of things that have really kind of come up for me from something you've both said. That, Angela, you mentioned about you bearing in mind you were having children and dealing with exhaustion and all those things. You either had somebody you were working for who recognized that and brought some basic humanity and empathy and said, yeah, of course, it's not a problem, we understand. Or you end up suppressing that element. You don't feel you can take that into the environment, and you muscle through and you almost pretend it's not happening. And John, the things you were talking about around the simple in inverted commas humanity of saying, no, give me the child. You do what you need to do in this. I'll take care of the child. I talk a lot in the work I do about inclusion criteria, and they shape, when we're younger, they shape our blueprint. When we're older, we move into the workforce, we find a different set of inclusion criteria which continue to shape us. But there are 5 inclusion criteria. There are the explicit, the really basic ones. This is your job. This is what we need you to do. Do this, you can remain included. But then there's a whole load of implied inclusion criteria, which we pick up on by the behaviors of the people we work with. Let's keep it to work. We pick up on what is and isn't acceptable. And when we have those things, we then have a whole load of assumed inclusion criteria that we put on ourselves, which the structure of work being about productivity, efficacy, our worth being so tightly and narrowly defined by our work, that we then come up with a whole load of assumed things we can or can't do. I don't feel I can do that. And then we have two really destructive ones: inconsistent inclusion criteria, which you were talking about, the diversity of human beings, and creating a space where everybody can bring all of themselves to work. It's a very popular phrase in employment at the moment and in human resources and recruitment: bring your whole self to work. If that isn't consistently applied, it's massively destructive. And the most destructive is insincere inclusion criteria. So if goals move, or if things are just lip service, which in my career, I worked for a talent acquisition organization, and we would see it in the clients we worked with all the time. There's a tick box exercise, DE&I, diversity, equality and inclusion. Yeah, we have to hire more women. For a long period in the UK, that's where we have to make it look like we're interviewing more women. These are insincere inclusion criteria. These are how organizations maintain the status quo. And the way we're talking about, how do we humanize work and workplaces? I came into this thinking, well, we take a big can of petrol, we make sure everybody's out of business, and then we burn the system down and start again. It's very unlikely that is going to happen. But we can start by really looking at these inclusion criteria and actually specifically training our managers and the people who get promoted beyond their competence, or get promoted out of their wheelhouse and niche. We kind of go, this is what we mean when we talk about an inclusive environment. We make sure that the people who are looking after the human beings in an organization understand minimum levels of behavior. I work with organizations where, I'm rambling, apologies, but this last point, I worked with organizations where the members of the senior leadership team behaved abysmally to the people within the organization. And when they were called on it, which didn't happen very often, but when they were called on it, they always fell back on that, I'm just so passionate. And I would sit there saying, how do the clients feel when you lose your shit with them? Or are you not passionate with your clients? It's got nothing to do with passion. It is power dynamic. And an organization that wants to put humans at its center has to hold people accountable for their behavior, even if, though I worked in sales, even if those people are your top billers.
Yes,
that's a really have to remove that poison.
Really good point. I wanted to add something to what Wyndham said, which led on from what I had said before. When we talk about leadership had to show me when I was pregnant or having kids that it was okay, or I had to suppress it. I wanted to add a third, or I had to be strong enough to be who I wanted to be or had to be in order to survive, to help change the system. Because even if you burn down the system with your petrol can, gas can here in North America, the system doesn't actually exist in the building. It exists here because we've all been ingrained with it.
Yeah.
So I remember near the end of my engineering career, when I had a child, and I had to pump, you guys just don't get that joy either. And I was doing all day technical reviews, and it was just one of those things. I'm not going to compromise this, because number one, I'd probably explode. But so, they'd say, would you do a technical review? And it's like, yes, I will, but I need a break at 10, 12, and 2. And, that was just a non-negotiable that I imposed, and people were just totally fine with it, because if they wanted me to review a project, that was my rules. So that is another thing that we as a workforce can actually help change the system by just knowing who we are authentically and living that with wild abandon and with power behind it. Because when you do good work, or people know that you do good work, then it's like they're going to adapt to help you work within that existing system. And in doing so, you change it.
And it seems a key part of that is for those who are in management or leadership roles, or who are setting up the system, are responsible for, developing the way things work, to have the humility to understand that the way they see the world is not necessarily the way the world is. And the way they see the world is not necessarily better than the way other people see the world. I had a senior manager at the university when I was only an academic for 10 years or something. I had a senior manager there who contemptuously said, "I don't know what all you people are complaining about not having time for research. I can turn out an equation before breakfast." And he was an engineer, actually, who had been promoted up to senior management. Great, I'm glad he can turn out an equation before breakfast. I can't. That's not what my research is. And so somebody who goes, "I come in every day and I leave my problems at the door." Super. Some people don't do that. Some people come in and they're flying one day and struggling the next. So one of the ways of ensuring genuine agency is the person who is in a position of responsibility always to be aware that they are making assumptions about other people. And instead of making those assumptions, ask questions like, how do you work best? What works for you? Okay, this is, I completely hear what's minimum standards, Wyndham. This is what we need. How does this work with you? If there is no way of reconciling who you are and how you want to be with what we need, then this is the wrong job for you. But if there is a way of reconciling, you can bring your genius into our organization and we will grow by it. But if the manager goes, "Well, sorry, I know how this has to happen," they have limited the diversity of the workforce to people who think just like them. And that's death.
Yeah, it's a fascinating point, because I have a very powerful experience with a manager who saw the humanity in me, and I got to a point in this is actually the last job I had before I left my career, where for any number of reasons, my emotional well of resilience and energy, the ability I had to show up every day and maintain the facade that I cared, I'd run out of energy, and my performance had gone off a cliff, and I knew it. Everybody else knew it. And he invited me into a meeting, and he sat me down. It was a glass meeting room, so it was like, well, don't cry, Wyndham, but I felt like my tears were here just going in, because I thought he was going to fire me, because that's sales. And he minded taking a hat off, and he just said, "For the next 60 seconds, I'm your friend, not your boss." And he just said, "There are other things you can do." And then he put his hat back on, and then he said, "Wyndham, I can see you're struggling. How can I help?" And it was not what I was expecting, and it completely changed the dynamic I was in that job for another 9 months, maybe 12 months. And eventually I left, but he saw me as a human being rather than someone who was currently getting in the way of them doing the work they wanted to do. Hugely powerful for me as an individual. So if you're watching, Jeremy, thank you very much.
Well,
there are good managers out there.
Yeah,
yes, there are. So, John, we're coming up to 45. Are there any comments in the live stream?
Not that I can
Any
see.
questions?
No, not that I can see, although I'm not entirely sure how these things happen.
Again, new live stream skills.
Me and technology are not always the best of friends. I did actually have the live stream there, but now I've lost it, so I've got no idea what's happening anymore. So I reckon we wrap it up.
Sounds good.
I didn't see any questions or comments there. Anyone want to put a full stop on this? Andrew, have you got any final thoughts or insights?
I just want everyone to remember to tilt the table and help your fellow person out when you see someone struggling. Is like tilt the table so it helps them.
Well, you responded to something I'd said. I want to respond to something Wyndham said. That last story you told of when you were struggling at work, it was very powerful, because it reminded me of, in some ways, you know, if you want to give a soundbite piece of advice, if you want to humanize the workplace, treat people like humans and remember that you too are human. And if we can start from there, you know, maybe we're at least tilting the table in the right direction. Wyndham, have you got any final nugget?
Yeah, I think it would just be, there are other things you can do. So if you are in a workplace that isn't meeting enough of your deeper needs, and I think part of it is really giving ourselves the space and time and permission to recognize what our deeper needs are, and then recognizing there are myriad places we can go to have those served and serviced, if you like, and not to stay in environments that are destructive to us.
We'll wrap it up there.
Okay.
First
Thank you very
Tuesday
much.
talks. First Tuesday talks take place first Tuesday of every month, and live on LinkedIn, apparently. The recordings then get put into the School of Humankind YouTube channel, which I believe is at School of Humankind on YouTube.
Funny how that works.
It's funny how it works. If you're watching this and you're interested in what we do, our website is www.schoolofhumankind.com. There are community events coming up. There's one from Wyndham fairly soon. I think
Thursday.
On Thursday, is it? Wow. Okay. And I think next week I'm running one on how to run a brilliant workshop. And there's plenty of others coming up. So pop over to the website and have a look. But for now, thank you from me, and I'm sure from Angela and Wyndham. And see you next time with a bit of luck.